My daughter-in-law left my son, abandoned him, just because she found out that he has terminal cancer and she doesn't want to be around with him to watch him meet his demise. Well, we learned a very devastating secret that she was hiding from everyone, including my son. My wife and I had recently had to let go of our son David after he's been forcefully taken away from us by cancer. I'm doing my best to try to adjust to it, but my wife is not doing well at all. It's been 2 months and it's still hard on her. I've caught her crying in her sleep twice since David's death. One time she called out his name and gotten silent when she remembered what our new reality was. If you've ever had a relative with cancer, or have one right now, then you know how difficult it is to adjust to. And you're not even the patient, so your feelings are nothing compared to theirs. The constant medication therapy and watching life slowly leave the body of a loved one is a nightmare. A relative had told us that it had all happened for the best as David was finally at peace. I don't know about that, but I do know that I wish my son was here. I do. Whenever I try to stay strong for my wife and push aside or hide my pain, I just want to break something or yell at the heavens for taking David immediately after. I'll always remember the little stages of David's life. I never did forget them, but when he was healthy, I did not acknowledge them either. He was the brilliant type, probably inherited from, his mom. I used to be so proud of the excellent grades and awards that he brought from home. He wasn't really sporty, and I remember being disappointed about that in the beginning. I tried to get him to like soccer or any sport, but he turned out to be bad. He was fair at tennis, I'd say, and developed the skills. I wish that I was happier when I discovered this. Instead, I just tried so much, until Edna told me to leave him as he was. At that time, I just really wanted to boast that my son was both academically gifted and sport gifted. I wish I had not made him do that. He had sensed my slight disappointment and had switched to enjoying sports on the TV, and had grown to like it. I felt better after it, but now that I think about it, David wasn't so enthusiastic about it right from the very beginning. He did it because of me. I should stop talking about this now, it's really hard for me. High school was another trying time for me, or is it for David, since I put pressure on him. He wasn't a fan of parties, and he only ever had one girlfriend till he graduated. I thought he was bullied at school at some point due to his reluctance to do what his schoolmates usually do. It turned out that David really liked his solitude. Compared to loud activities and constant mingling, he had good friends and his girlfriend was a wonderful girl. They broke up when she went to study in another country. David was also really respected at school, because of his brain and easygoing nature. Edna had told me to be happy that things were that way for him, instead of being upset that he wasn't your regular teenager. She always was closer to David, and I'll always be grateful for her being around just to take care of our son with me. David grew up to be a fine man, because of Edna mainly. Well, that dreaded moment when David was diagnosed. Leukemia. It was a few months after he had gotten married to Janet. We were all shocked by the news, and I watched as my once happy son slowly became depressed. To make matters worse, Janet had left him, saying that she could not be with someone who was going to drop dead any time. I gave her the benefit of the doubt by assuming that she was only talking out of pain, but that was not the case. You see, my horrid daughter-in-law abandoned David, straight up. At the moment he needed her the most. It's something I'll never forgive her for. Edna took David under her wing and took care of him, and I did my best to help my family. Medical bills, quality family time, and father-son discussions. David was slowly getting better as he continued to receive treatment, but he was never the same post-diagnosis, and now he's really gone. Edna and I deluded ourselves into thinking that he would be back to normal if we just ensured David took his treatment seriously. Despite what the doctors had clearly told us, it's painful when all your hope just gets deflated in the blink of an eye. The call from the hospital was nothing compared to seeing David in the state that he was in. Edna had cried rivers, and I'd cried later in the bathroom. We held the funeral just 3 weeks ago, and I really hope that my son, wherever he is, finds the happiness that he truly deserves. I'm telling you all this so you judge with full knowing of the story. Edna and I received shock 2 days ago. My wife is passive about it and can't care less, but I personally think that she should not ignore it as much as she is. You see, Janet called me 2 days ago and asked for money to take care of her son, Stephen. At first I thought she was insane, but when she told me the child was David's, I had to pay more attention to her. It turns out that Janet said, well, she hadn't known she was pregnant at the time she left my son. She'd also been keeping tabs on David and knew when the funeral rites were done and over with, and I told her I'd get back to her and discuss the issue with Edna later that night. She had told me to ignore Janet, who was trying to get the money out of us. I don't know if that really is the case. Yes, the girl messed up a lot. Yes, she left David. Yes, kept his child from him and did not even have the decency to pay David some respects when she was well aware of his passing. But what she could do was call and ask for money. Believe me, if she wasn't taking care of David's alleged child, I would have ignored her without thinking twice. But I could not let my grandson suffer like that. It was unfair to the boy. He had done nothing wrong. Edna does not want to budge, though, and her decision really matters to me. Do I just ignore Janet? I'll definitely call to get proof, but if she really is telling the truth, then I don't know what I'll do next, honestly. Update number 1. Guys, Janet was not lying. In a way, I knew this already. Edna and I have seen Stephen and have confirmed that he really is our grandbaby. And yes, we do send Janet money. Mainly because of Stephen. The things I noticed when I visited, I have a few theories, and Edna agrees with me. Then there's the fact that Janet's being highly unreasonable. She never really seemed like the sensible type to me, but her actions lately are just annoying. I'll start from the very beginning when Janet contacted me after David's passing. I contacted her again, asking her to send me a picture of her child. It wasn't a sure way of knowing if she was telling the truth, but I wanted to see her son, and when I did, I was convinced. Stephen was a spitting replica of David. His face and eyes, and I showed Edna the picture, and I was sent, and after a while she agreed to send money to Janet, but we had to visit the child first. It took a while for Janet to agree to let us see our grandson. At first she was upset about us not wanting to help out till we saw Stephen for ourselves, but at some point she caved. My best guess is that she understood that she would not be getting anything if she did not do what we asked. We still had to be sure that she wasn't trying to extort us. You know, at that time, Edna had told me that while Stephen did share a few features with David, she would never trust someone like Janet. After reminding me of the things Janet had done to, well, our dying son, I understood where she was coming from. In fact, I agreed with her completely. The visit was not a long one, and I should have mentioned the fact that Edna and Janet cannot stand each other, though it should be obvious. Even before Janet vanished, Edna had always thought Janet was wrong for David. She turned out to be right, but the deed had been done. I tried to keep both women's tongues in checks because of Stephen. He was quiet all throughout and reminded me of David when he was younger. I know Edna said that she wanted 100% certainty, but I could tell. I'm sure she could too, but just wanted tangible proof. After overlooking how much Stephen reminded me of David, I noticed the other details. He was too pale, like he spent all his time indoors. He also was quite slim, and other than being quiet, was shy. It took a while for him to talk to Edna, and she was great with children. I don't want to jump to conclusions by saying Janet wasn't doing a good job as a mom. Stephen's room wasn't anything to write home about, though. The toys that were in the room were either defective or clearly overused. He had a few clothes and shoes, and there were books in the room. I thought Janet had bought them for him, but he got them from either school or his classmates. A bookworm like David. I promised Stephen that I'd get him more books when next time I visited, and he lit up like a Christmas tree. It was both a sad and joyful thing to witness. Edna was quite upset with Janet, and as soon as she noticed that I'd returned to the living room alone, asked Janet what she did for a living. She doesn't have a job. So I asked why she didn't reach out earlier if she knew she didn't have the means to take care of little Steven, and even herself. She made up some excuse about her not wanting to add to our troubles with David at the time. Was she kidding me? I think it was at the time I realized fully well that David had died without knowing that Steven even existed. Edna had said that, well, to me before we visited, but it hit sometime during the visit. I got mad at Janet, but unlike Edna, I'm quiet when I'm upset. I just watched the exchange between Janet and my wife. I'll keep this short. Edna did not find Janet's current condition satisfactory and had wired her some money to take care of Steven. She also asked Janet to send her resume so she could help her search for a job, since she could not find one herself. Edna had even wanted to cook before we left, but surprise, there was little to nothing in the fridge. We left disappointed but hopeful. Edna and I talked about everything after visiting Steven and Janet. She told me that she felt she was making a mistake sending someone like Janet money, but I wasn't sure. Janet was still a mother, and it wasn't like she was glowing while Steven looked unhealthy. I told her that we would check up on Steven after a few weeks, and we did. I gave the little guy some more books I thought he would like. He was happy, so happy I almost cried because his joy was so contagious. This was about a month ago. Along with what I'll term Janet's monthly stipend, we've sent her rent for the next 6 months and some money for an online degree Janet was interested in getting. Honestly, at some point, her demands were starting to irritate me, but whenever I remembered Steven, I reminded myself that it was all for him. Edna was unable to get Janet a good job with her experience, and after giving Janet some advice, she was able to convince her to get an online degree and work remotely. Well, the latter was temporary enough, though, and I'm not entirely surprised. Edna had asked to see Steven again. She was planning a trip for when he was on holidays, and then there was the fact that she adores Steven. To our surprise, Janet refused. She told us that she did not want us to see Steven anymore. I'd personally called, and she didn't even give a reasonable excuse, reminding me that she had the right to let whoever she wanted see her child. She mentioned that Edna was not a good influence on Steven, which was quite laughable. When I pointed out that she did not like Edna because she never held herself back when it came to berating and criticizing her actions, Janet agreed. But she called it emotional blackmail and mental harassment. She also said that we were trying to turn her son against her, as Steven anticipated our visit and asked when the next time we would see my wife and me. There are times when you really can't say anything to a person for your own sanity. This was one of those trying times. I had to end the call because Janet was making no sense, and I did not think that I would make her understand without losing my own damn sanity. I was annoyed at myself afterward, but felt that I needed to sit back and think everything through. So I told Edna not to call Janet again, despite her wanting to. Most likely she would get upset and worsen the situation, though I really don't know why Janet made this decision all of a sudden. Also, I've made plans to go see Steven, whether or not Janet wants us to. What exactly does she think she's going to keep us away from our grandbaby after everything that we've done for her? Update number 2. Edna went on a trip with Janet. This might seem surprising given how things ended last time, but there's a plan in motion, and I'm here to stay with Steven while Edna executes her plan. Honestly, I really don't know what it is and why she had to travel out with Janet, but if it will help that woman see reason, then guys, I'm completely fine with it. The most annoying thing happened when we went over to visit Steven and Janet. They weren't home. I thought that simply somehow Janet had found out that we were coming, though it must have been highly unlikely. Edna had reasoned that we were just there at the wrong time, but why on earth did it have to be when we visit that they were just miraculously absent? Edna and I planned to wait till late at night until a neighbor informed us that Janet had moved out. Yeah, that's quite shocking, isn't it? When she had left. And where was she living now, I wondered. Nobody in the building even knew, though. A lot of tenants really disliked Janet, while others didn't even know who she was. That drive home was disappointing, and before I could stop her, Edna had called and demanded that Janet tell her where she was. We didn't learn much after that call, and Janet really had moved, but she refused to tell us where. When I asked if she wanted us to do something first before she revealed her location, she told me that she was interested in having a house of her own. I wondered if that woman even knew how much it cost to, get a house built. I hung up on her, sure that she had lost her mind finally. Edna was having none of it and had informed me that she was finally going to give Janet the punishment she deserved. She was very upset, and she said and ranted and raved about how selfish and insensitive Janet was. The first thing she did was to record another conversation between herself and Janet. That was the first time I'd hear her speak to Janet without insulting her in any way. When I asked why she recorded the conversation, she said she needed the proof. From the little I managed to overhear, Edna had talked about providing everything for Janet and Stephen. Despite not being Stephen's legal parents, she also brought up Janet's keeping of Stephen away from the entire family and went over the state of Janet's former apartment. I'm not sure, but I think Edna was trying to get proof that Janet was an unsuitable guardian for Stephen. Anyone who heard the little I did would immediately think of taking Stephen away from her. It was smart on Edna's part, I'll admit, and I wondered how dense Janet could really be. Oh, right. Before that particular conversation, Edna had promised to consider Janet's request. That was probably why Janet had let the conversation go on for that long. I had to ask Edna if she was serious, and she laughed and called me silly. The day after the phone call, Edna had asked me if I would be able to take care of Stephen. I said I would be able to, and had to ask why. She told me that she would be traveling out with Janet soon on a mini vacation. She refused to tell me anything until she had gotten justice for David and Stephen. Her words. With the way that she spoke, the last thing on her mind was a relaxing mini vacation. So what exactly did she aim to achieve by traveling out with our daughter-in-law? Edna stayed up for some nights, thinking. She mentioned something about the law not catching up to her because of her plans, but I didn't understand. She said it while thinking out loud. Well, she's a retired lawyer. I didn't ask, though. Edna was capable and a smart woman. She knew what she was doing and why she was doing it. Yes, I was beyond curious, but I trusted her more than anything. If she said she was going to get justice, she was. It would be nice if I knew what she was up to, though. Update number 3. It's been a while, and in that span of time, quite a number of things have happened. Stephen now lives with Edna and I. Janet's out of our lives for Lord knows how long, but she isn't going to be back anytime soon. I'll tell you the best I can, because even I don't know everything. Edna refuses to tell me for a reason, and I don't know what that reason is. Janet did tell me a few things, and while I do pity her, she deserves it. Edna and Janet left the country 3 weeks ago. Edna booked a flight straight to Barbados. We had a small house there, so I assumed she would just take Janet to the house. And then Janet arrived with Stephen when the preparations were made. We had all agreed that I'd stay with Stephen. He was still young, so I had to make sure that he was going to school and eating right. I'm not so good in the kitchen, but Edna had left enough food in the fridge and asked a neighbor for a favor. Stephen was just as bad the first time I saw him, if he wasn't worse. I asked Janet what she had been doing with the money we gave her, and she ignored me. Edna was silent as she looked between Stephen and Janet, and I had a feeling that if murder wasn't a crime, Janet would never have escaped the death of that moment. I still get upset and mad whenever I think about it. Janet herself was wearing what I'm sure was brand new clothing, yet Stephen looked like he only ate a meal all day. I would have slapped her if Stephen wasn't around, whether it was the right thing to do or not. Stephen is an amazing kid. I was quite surprised to learn that he hasn't shied at all. It was more of awareness and fear of what Janet would do to him when he was alone with her. He was smart, as I expected, and while he did not understand the games, he was always asking questions about them. As weird and cheesy as this may sound, I sometimes think I'm reliving my moments with David. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes I did, though, and I encouraged Stephen's reading habits, buying him more books and reading them with him. Reading's a nice pastime for me now, and Stephen wrote a poem for me about me and Edna. It wasn't long, but it brought a big smile to my face. The piece of paper with the poem in it is now in my wallet, and I've read it to myself sometimes. Edna returned a week ago, and she was smiling from ear to ear, and I knew her plan was a success. I asked about Janet's whereabouts to know when to get Stephen ready to leave, and Edna had told me that Janet was staying in Barbados for a while, and that we were responsible for Stephen for the time being. Well, I didn't mind. In fact, I was happy with the news. I had more time with my grandson, and Janet was nowhere to be found. That was, until she called me 4 days ago with a foreign number, and that was how I learned what Edna had done to Janet. Ugh, Janet had told me that Edna had abandoned her in the house. She then told me some jerks had her bound and tortured for days. I could only make noises as I listened, hoping it was nothing more than a dirty lie. Janet was sure that Edna was behind everything and had promised to make her pay. I confronted Edna, obviously. She told me that the police weren't going to do anything about it and that she was only doing what she meant to be done. Edna was behind the jerks attacking Janet, and she had given them instructions and even paid them to make sure Janet learned her lesson. Well, in the beginning, the very beginning, I thought she made a mistake. Janet wasn't a good person, but she was still Stephen's mother. Edna then reminded me of the recording she had, along with more proof of Janet's ineptitude. Well, Janet had said quite a number of things to Edna without thinking. When I told her that Janet had plans to make her pay for messing with her, Edna promised that nothing of the sort was going to happen. Janet called again yesterday, and she asked for money to leave Barbados, so I gave the phone to Edna. I literally had nothing to say to her. After Edna was done talking to Janet, she told me that Janet was going to lay low for the time being. The recordings were one thing that she could use against her in court in the case of a child neglect. Edna promised to put Janet in prison if she even attempted to mention her assault in Barbados to anyone. She also told me that she was going to make sure Janet paid all the money that we had given her, since she did not use it to do what it was meant for. I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell Janet is in a tight spot as it is. She has multiple pieces of proof of evidence against her. No evidence that Edna was behind her assault and was going to pay back a large amount of money when she was literally jobless. This is why I said I pitied her earlier on. At the same time, she deserves it for what she put my entire family through. I talked to Stephen about his mother before he went to sleep yesterday. He mentioned something about missing her, but wishing she was nice. My heart broke for the kid. I don't know how long it'll take all 3 of us to adjust, but hey, I'll do my very best to ensure that little Stephen lacks absolutely nothing. Well, I'm just glad OP was able to get full custody of little Stephen, because there's no telling what he would have had to grow up through. It was so heartbreaking to hear him say he misses his mom, but just simply wishes that she would be nicer to him. I mean, that one really hit. I want to know your thought, guys, about today's story. Say, for instance, you were in OP's position, being 65 years of age, and you find out that your son has a kid that he didn't know about. I want to know your thoughts. How do you handle this? I mean, this story was sad. It had some very turbulent moments with the ex, and I just wanted to know your thoughts. So guys, drop it down below. Let's discuss this one. My name's Mr. Reddito, and I narrate stories like this every day. So if you want to be a part of these daily videos, stop on by, see what videos we're up to today. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and just remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.